So, without further ado, I'd like to pass over to John. John is the risk and assurance manager, or a risk and assurance manager at Mazars. As I said, he's from the.
I wish.
You wish. As I said, he's from the Mazars office in Birmingham, and he's going to be talking to us about their journey with IDEA. So let me just.
As if by magic.
There we go. There's a clicker there if you want.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. Hi everyone, I'm John. As introduced, I'm part of Mazars Birmingham. I've been part of Mazars for almost 8 years now, well just over 8 years I should say. So I'm based up in Birmingham, and for pretty much all of those 8 years I've been an IDEA user. But as a firm we've really developed our stance, we've changed how we think about data analysis, and we use it in a number of our service lines. I'm just going to give you an insight just about where we've come from, where we're going to, and just a few of the challenges that we've faced along the way. As we're talking about history, I thought I'd bring a bit of history with me. This is my version of IDEA, version 7. Don't know if anyone's ever seen one of these before. It's a bit of a relic. One of my colleagues, I showed this to one of my colleagues on our tax team who also uses software, and he said he started using IDEA in 1994 when it was pre-Windows, and it was just a black screen with a data input field. So there you go. So I just give you a little bit, if you don't know us, a little bit about Mazars. We're a global accountancy and professional services firm. We kind of do everything that you'd really expect an accountancy and professional services firm to do. We work across almost 90 countries now with 23,000 people. But in the UK, we're 17 offices, of which this is one. Over 1,700 professionals across the business, and there's just a little bit about us in a page, really. Just so if you're not aware, we kind of, as I said, we do the majority of things that you'd expect, but in terms of IDEA, we tend to use it for advisory work, for tax work, and also we're starting to use it in a few other different ways, which I'll talk about as we go through the presentation. So a little bit just about where we use it and how we use it. There are 4 key areas that we particularly use IDEA in. The top left and the top right are the main ones. Public sector internal audit, that's my bag. Like I said, 8 years ago, joined the firm, a fresh-faced 18-year-old school leaver with high hopes and expectations, which have all been dashed, as you'll see, as we go through the presentation. But yeah, so in the top left, we work across a range of public services, whether that be charities, local government, NHS, healthcare, and kind of further beyond into the charities, housing, etc. And where we've really developed this, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but we've really developed IDEA use in that sector in terms of advisory work. So we work with, nationally as a team, we've got over 200 auditors, internal auditors I should say, that work across the public sector space, and 1 in every 6 of them uses IDEA on a daily basis. We've got a corporate IDEA license, which allows us to kind of check in and check licenses in and out, which is great. But some of the key work we've done there is really about developing how we give our clients that assurance that they need. And a lot of people in the room are probably thinking exactly the same thing. You probably do this in your day job. What's quite unique about us and how we use it is that we get to do that 6 times a week for 6 different clients and getting 6 different results, and it allows us to really see the wider sector and help implement a different approach every time we see it. In terms of tax, I mentioned Tony, he's former HMRC. I know they've got a fairly large cohort in the room, so I won't say anything about them. But we use it kind of in terms of responding to and preempting HMRC inquiries, doing mock HMRC inspections with it, and also looking at VAT mistreatment, being able to look at data across the piece when we're looking for anomalies in tax data is a really crucial one, and we've been able to identify quite significant variances in VAT and tax paid. The bottom 2 we're really developing as we go, as we're going at the moment. So visualization, one of the biggest things about IDEA for us is being able to see a large amount of data in one place and be able to visualize it across the piece. Something you really can't do that easily with other pieces of software or kind of Excel packages, etc. But it really helps, I'll talk about this again a little bit later, but really helps focus a client's mind when you're trying to, I think one of the most difficult parts of my job is trying to explain to someone why this is important, and why what we do, it sounds like a very complicated thing, data analytics, when I'd argue it's not when you get your head around it, but it's being able to communicate that's the difficult part. And we're also using it in external audit, but not probably in the most traditional of ways. A lot of external audit providers do a level of data analysis around journals, around cash, etc. We're using it in a slightly different way at the moment, trying to refocus what assurance we can give over an external audit service. So as we move into kind of a more digital and data-driven age, a lot of those financial accounts will be prepared on base data-based reports. And what we were finding is some of those reports weren't accurate. Systems weren't generating reports that were actually reflective of the transactions within them. And we're using idea to validate them as a back end for some clients. And it's a really interesting, different approach, throwing up some really difficult challenges for both us and the clients. So how are we adding value? It's a really cheesy term, how do we add value? But I'm going to use it anyway. So the top two are both very interlinked, kind of seeing the whole picture. I'm sure all the idea users in the room will understand when I talk about being able to see a data set on a page rather than having that great Excel error message come up that says too many lines. But being able to see everything in one place, whether that's 10,000 transactions or 1 million transactions processed through whatever system you're looking at, or whether it's a regular account, if you've linked it to a server, so you can do that on a continuous basis. It's being able to see everything in one place, and what that allows us to do as an external assurance provider is actually give you assurance over that piece of data as a client. So it allows us to say, we've looked at every financial transaction that has gone through the ledger in the past 12 months, and these are the ones that we think are bad, or bad's the wrong word, but might be worth investigating. And that's where we get sweating the small stuff from, because 99% of all transactions in a business are going to be fine. They're going to be managed well. They're going to be in line with what we'd expect a system to be doing. They're going to be the right amount of VAT paid on them. It's going to be the finance has gone through. It's going to be a property that's been added to a system correctly. It's the 1% that really causes us problems. It's that 1% of cases where someone authorises their own purchase order and buys himself a Lamborghini, or someone erases a load of documents from your tax system. It's all about managing that 1%, and again, what we're able to do with IDEA with our clients is take a look at that data in the whole and focus on that 1%, which is really difficult to do, I think, as an internal auditor. 8 years ago when I joined, it's great to take a sample of 10 of whatever, but without looking at that in a more wider sense, without understanding what we're doing across the piece, I think that the age of giving assurance on a small sample is really a bit behind us now as we move into a more digital age. So those are the key things we do, especially in my service line in terms of internal audit. And that can be a whole range of tests that we've designed in terms of where we've come from. When I joined, we had 3 of these in the business in our team, plus the ones that we used. We had 6 licenses across the business as a whole. We've now got a corporate license, which is excellent and really, really great, but we've grown steadily around that period. Before that point, we were really reliant on data analysis being done in a spreadsheet in Excel, and as the world moves on, I think we realised really quickly that that's just not good enough. It's just the world is moving to such a different place, and one of the things I really think is important going forward for the sector and also for us in the room is understanding the kind of data governance aspect of what we're doing. It's quite easy to look at IDEA as just a piece of software that lets us look at transactions, but actually forming a much bigger piece of that is what data governance are we doing, what controls are we creating around that data governance, and how do we manage that, and how do we input into that. So that's from where we've come from. We've gone from internal audit and tax kind of using this on an ad hoc basis, finding where the USB dongle is, finding the CD or the floppy disk to install it on your laptop, to actually using this as a baseline for us in those teams, actually using IDEA as a focus point for our audit work, both internal and external, and being able to say, we're not just going to focus on a small sample, we're not just going to look at a small amount of transactions, but actually we're going to look at that bigger piece and understand that bigger piece of data, because we all work for organisations that are data run, whether we kind of like it or not. I don't think anymore. There's a great example of one of my clients is a housing association. They manage 100,000 properties in the northwest, and they said to me the other day, There's no way anymore one person in this organisation can know every single property, but 10 years ago they'd be expected to. And it's really important that actually no one can know a business inside out anymore, not at that scale and not at that size. Probably no one in this room can really understand everything that's going on in each individual transaction in your businesses. And that's why it's so valuable to be able to look at things on the whole. The other two, I'll touch on briefly, but in terms of process and control, it's kind of what I've already been talking about. As we go into a much more data-driven age, we need to understand that those processes, those controls, that refocus on whether our data is good enough. How do we make decisions without data, or we can't anymore? It allows us to focus on that on a real, absolute way, and actually look at those processes beyond that data. So it's not just about a single spreadsheet anymore. It's about how does one system interlink with another and how do they reconcile, but also what's the data flow between those two, and how do we visualize that, and then how do we communicate that to a client. There's a whole process that we can manage throughout IDEA that's really important to us. The other part of that is, I'm sure you're all fully aware of the audit function within IDEA. It's really important to us for our professional standards, but it's a great piece of software because actually I can look at someone's working papers in IDEA in my team and understand exactly what tests they've done, where they've gone wrong potentially, but also what they've done right. I can rerun that test myself and get the same results every single time, which is really difficult if you're trying to do that in a spreadsheet software, and someone accidentally deletes a single line of code or formulae. Creating solutions is the other way we are trying to add value with IDEA, and that's a really important one for us, is when a client comes to us and says, we've got this problem, we don't understand this piece of data, we don't understand this system, and actually working with them to either design that or design a test with us that we can do on IDEA, linking that up to their servers if we can, if they already have IDEA, and actually running that more regularly and getting that regular assurance on that piece of data. I'll move on just to what kind of challenges we faced. As I say, we've gone from kind of 6 licenses across the business to the corporate license model. We've got over 40 users now. And these are the big 4 that I came up with when I was writing this, and I think number 1 should probably be much bigger than the other 3. Thinking back, but actually getting the data right is the biggest challenge we ever face when we're working with a client. When you go and ask them for everything on their accounts receivable ledger for the past 12 months, someone will say, what's that? How do we get that? What do we do? Can I print it out and give it you in paper format? You have to say no, sorry. So they print it out and they scan it in as PDF, and they think that's just as great. But it's always making sure that we get the right data. Without the right data, we can't look at it, we can't test it, we can't get a result from it. And that's not just getting a PDF or getting a piece of paper rather than a classic text file. It's actually about understanding what is in that data, and I think that's probably when we're training our team on how to use IDEA, that's the biggest trouble we face, is actually getting someone to look at a piece of data and understand it before you start analysing it. It's so important to do that, and you get to the end of it and you think, actually, that was the wrong data to start with, unfortunately. But number 2 is one that I get quite often from some wider business when I talk about IDEA, isn't that just a really fancy spreadsheet? And I hope no one's listening from IDEA, but yeah, kind of. But the bigger point here is that it's not just a spreadsheet. It's so important that people understand the power of IDEA, and I think that's why days like this are really useful. When I started, I'm completely self-taught. When I got this license 8 years ago, I went and learned everything I know about IDEA on kind of YouTube tutorials, playing with the software, getting the wrong data most of the time, trying to do something fancy that I didn't really understand. But what I learned through that process is actually I couldn't do a lot of that in a spreadsheet. And even as they advance, and even as Excel advances, there's a lot of things that I do in IDEA now that I couldn't do 5 years ago. And I still can't do in a spreadsheet. So it's important to remember that it isn't just a spreadsheet, and I think I already mentioned the audit function for us is really important, but actually being able to backtrack from what you've already started with and go, actually, how did I get here? How do I get back to it? Helping clients understand it, it's really difficult. Finding out, trying to tell people about how this really fancy data integrity software is going to be really great for their assurance framework, or really is going to help us do a tax investigation, mock tax investigation. people think it's this kind of superfluous, amazing being that sits in a room, and like throw back to this image of a server sitting 12 feet high and 6 feet wide that you have to feed little cards into. But it's not that, and it's helping people understand what the difference is and why it's important, but also that it's actually a really simple concept. Keeping ahead, it's really difficult. Days like this are really important for us, because how do we keep it in advance of that data governance piece? How do we keep it in advance of those challenges that come forward for our clients and for us internally? So, there we go. So what does the future look like for us? Just a few thoughts on what idea for us as a kind of professional services body looks like in the future. As external audit requirements become much more stringent, much more difficult to comply with, we're really pushing on how we integrate IDEA with that across the data integrity piece, and not just for the work we do with a client, but also internally. How do we use IDEA to make sure that we're meeting those requirements? And that's quite an interesting piece that we're going through at the moment. Data governance, I've already mentioned. I think this is probably one of the areas that most organisations that I work with just aren't quite there with understanding yet. And if they are, it's communicating that and kind of understanding what data has in that piece. But how do we make sure that we've got the best data to make decisions with? And the answer, I'd argue, is making sure you've got a good approach to data analytics at the back end of that data input. Tax management through data. I've already mentioned tax a couple of times. It's one of our strongest kind of service lines, one of our strongest work ethics. It's not something that I know particularly well with myself, but having worked with Tony and the team to develop some of the idea what they do, there's huge room of development with how we can integrate our tax system into idea tests, which allow a much more focused approach going forward. And continuous data analytics is, I think, again, linking back to data governance, something that organisations aren't that great at the moment. And actually, that continuous auditing point of, do we need to be pushing a button every week, or can we get a machine to push that button for us and tell us exactly what's wrong, what we think is wrong, and what to do about it? I think that's the real push for us as we develop and we go forward as internal auditors. Personally, anyway. So, that was me, really. Thanks for no one for heckling. I'll hand over to the next. I was really impressed today with all the presentation names. I went with a really bland presentation name, and it's quite similar to another one later on. But the big idea was really good. Thought there was a lot of good puns in idea, and I'm really sorry that I didn't come up with a better one. So yeah, but if you want to talk to me, those are my details. But I'll be around all day. Thank you all for coming, and we're really happy to be hosting this event. Hopefully, everyone has a great day. Thank you.